wanted to have this on here because we are featuring Graham in a couple of months, and also we like to talk about his article section, and this is where I found you, and so I will actually definitely speak about your discovery.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm looking forward to going over the details with this. What's your deal with USA, this doctor that apparently feels that you're stepping on his toes?
It's Dr. Luigi Assay. I guess it's pronounced Assay or Assay. I
Oh, I
haven't
thought it
asked
was
him.
US Psy.
Yeah, USAI. It's almost like USAID. His deal is that well, I mean, he was the first person to see it, I guess, and recognized it as being as looking like a city. And I believe he did it in 2000 in 2020. But he never really went beyond that. He never really explained a lot of the details. And my discovery of the site was completely independent of his
Yeah.
discovery. I had not heard of it. It never caught my it wasn't on my radar anyway of being a lost city. I did my research, but it was only after I announced that I had discovered it did obviously somebody come through and mention that he had discovered it as well. In the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's important who's first. It's almost like the first person who comments in a YouTube thread who says first, right? You were the first person to see it, but
Yeah.
I recognize it for a little bit more than what he saw it. And to his credit, he saw it first. And I'm surprised that it hadn't been seen by a great number of people, to be honest with you, including a number of marine geologists who have been doing surveys around the area.
Yeah, no, I love what you've discovered, and your article is fabulous. We'll get into it. We haven't officially started yet. I'm just curious because he under the comments of the article, he pops up and says, "I feel that you haven't treated me well because you didn't reference me in your article." And I'm like, dude, what did you write a scientific white paper that only 10 people can look at, or
And on top of that, Cliff, the way he says it is like I did it on purpose. And if you actually
yeah,
read through the
he's almost
article,
accusatory.
I never mentioned specifically that I was the first to discover it. I frame everything as I discovered how I discovered it. Now
Yeah,
anybody could have read my article and wrote an article on
yeah.
how they discovered my article.
Yeah. Anyhow,
Yes.
I'm not going to bring him up in the interview.
Well, thank you.
I just wanted to ask you because I kind of reviewed the article again last night, and I was looking at some of the comments, and the vast majority are very positive, except for this one guy.
Yeah.
He seems like he's very unhappy. Anyhow, screw it.
Oh yes, I give him credit, and he even wrote a song about it. Apparently, and he lives really close to the area, so I can understand why he'd want to have credit, and I will give him credit for having discovered the anomaly first.
Yeah.
I think my research goes way beyond.
Yeah. Yeah.
It delves deeper into reasons why it's there more than the what.
Yeah. Andre, where are you located?
I'm in
St. John's, where?
Newfoundland.
Oh, you're in Newfoundland. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Do you have a website yet or no?
I don't have a website put together. No, I don't
Okay.
see very much use in them these days.
You are
But
writing a book at some point, it sounds like. So maybe when the book comes out.
well, I have the book almost ready. I had a few crashes recently because of the software that I've been using, and I'm like almost there. I got a couple more images to render out, and I'll have that ready to go. And it's probably a prudent idea to have a website, I guess, to go along with
For
the
the
book.
book, yeah, I don't know if you're self-publishing or you have a publisher in mind, but most publishers would recommend it simply because it supports the book, but also allows you to respond to an audience. I have 250,000 listeners who are going to be all over this, and because you've done an excellent job writing the article, but also Graham himself and many of his views of the ancient world say that the future will find digging underwater or diving underwater the reference point that he's had for ancient civilizations, because most of these cultures were living close to the water, not only in the Mediterranean, but on the Atlantic and the Pacific. So,
Yeah.
and it was brilliant for you to actually get your article published on Graham's site, because guys like me are always looking for that
I
stuff.
tell you, it's been hard breaking through, to be honest with you. I haven't had the luck to get on Joe Rogan like your other guests, like Dan the Dunker there.
Yeah, and
So,
that's where the book will come through. But the other thing is, I have a small team, And I'm Graham's on a show regularly, and so I'm always looking at the website. I'm the one who found you, and this will open the door for you a little bit. So
Well, I appreciate that, Cliff. I tell you, I have a lot more in the trunk waiting to go, to be honest with you.
yeah,
Um, I mean, I've alluded to Atlantis and a few other things, but when it comes down to it, Telepylos is the key to a lot of these lost civilizations. And once it is validated, it's going to open that door to all those other possibilities. Right now, you mentioned the word Atlantis in many circles, and people will just laugh at you. But if I get Telepylos validated, then all of a sudden those laughs will be muted, I believe.
does the book include other places like Telepylus?
Well, the ebook I was planning on writing was only going to include Telepylos, but then I mean I had been reading a larger book, including Atlantis, including the Hyperboreans as well, and the Tartessians. They were both mentioned in Greek mythology, and I have a plausible location for both of their civilizations as well.
Okay. So you're hoping that you're going to self-publish this book, is what you're thinking.
Yeah, yeah, it's going to be on Amazon if anything. I can't imagine I will get a publisher unless there's a connection that comes about based on my appearance with you. Maybe who knows?
Well, let me just
Certainly,
say this. I have somebody who can help you. It's Gail Tor, my producer, is looking for guys like you. You write well in your article, so if the book has the same kind of balance and good grammar, she can
oh
help
yeah.
you get a publisher.
Well, that'd be fantastic. I will certainly give you guys my pre copy to check out.
Yeah. Let me just tell
And
you right now, if your book is as clean as your article, when do you think you'll have it completed?
well, it really depends on how many words I'm aiming for. To be honest with you, to include Atlantis in my broader theories, looking at probably 200 pages, I would need probably a month or two
Okay.
at minimum. For the smaller ebook I was planning on doing with Telepylos alone specifically, which I was aiming for about 40 pages. I foresee having that done within the week.
But is Telopolis in your book?
Yeah, well, Telepylos is like was a chapter in my original book. Like I said, because it was discovered in the process. Like I discovered Atlantis, and I was doing my best to come up with a theory and evidence using mythology and science to have a well enough argument to present to scientists. But it was in that process of map making that I discovered Telepylos. So
Yeah.
it's part and parcel of the whole story. It really
Okay.
depends on how much you wanted the story.
I'm
Right.
just telling you that if it needs to be in your book, because this is the article, the discovery is a standalone feature
Yeah.
and is strong and it's evidentiary. You're not making stuff up. You have beautiful scans that are rendered beautifully and great evidence. And I mean, it's the foundation of a book, I would think. But
Yeah.
yeah. So anyhow, Gail Torr, Torr, tell her you were on the interview. She'll remember, and she can give you some guidelines because she's looking for new authors.
Reach out to her right away then afternoon.
And you want somebody like Inner Traditions who publishes alternative history, also new research that isn't going to be flagged as pseudo. Because I mean,
Right.
it'd be certain publishers might look at you and go, "What do you mean?" Telopolis. It's not, there's no such thing as Atlantis, that kind of mindset
Yeah.
without looking at the data.
And that's what I get from most scientists too. I mean, I've had the same dealings as let's say Dandy Duncan has there with John Hoops and
Oh,
Flint
really?
Dille. Actually, John Hoops called me ugly. That was his argument. His scientific argument against me was that I'm ugly, and I didn't know what I
Yeah,
was talking.
these guys can't conceive of anything before dynastic Egyptians or Sumeria and so forth and so on without, it's just ridiculous.
Oh, and it's so
I'm a
clear.
Mayanist, and it's almost like, show me the codis, show me the book of language, I'm like, oh Christ,
Yeah,
forget it.
yeah, yeah. You don't need it written down. It's written in the very earth itself.
Exactly,
It's
exactly.
written in geology.
We have to wonder what would happen to a civilization following the Younger Dryas impact theory that we talk a lot about here on Earth Ancients. If the water levels of the oceans rose several hundred feet, what would happen to a coastal town in the Atlantic or the Pacific or in the Mediterranean basin? We had Dr. Michael J on the program recently talking about the Mediterranean basin and the water rising there and the likelihood of different civilizations being covered in water and destroyed. Today we have what looks like great evidence with my guest today of in some cases, you might consider it a mythological location, but we'll have to get the details. But what we have is, in effect, the discovery of a city. And my guest today is André Chaisson, excuse me. And he is a engineer, has CAD experience. He is a research investigator who has actually found what looks to be an amazing discovery. And Andre, welcome to Earth Ancients. I'm really fascinated in this discovery of yours. When did you first lay eyes on this underground or underwater dwelling?
Thanks for having me, Cliff. I first laid eyes on this November 15th of last year. I was looking through some maps, and I was exploring the EMOD.net database and redrawing some maps for a theory that I had, doing some map making, and that's when I came across it.
Okay. And we should let people know that you are currently researching for a book on Atlantis with valid evidence like this, correct? You're using current technology that is underwater scanning technology and locating places like this location in the Mediterranean, correct?
Yeah, I'm using well-known databases that have been compiled by scientists over the past couple of decades. A little bit more what you'd find on Google Earth, more detailed maps using GIS systems generally. So yeah, so it's not scans that I've done myself. Obviously, I'm planning on doing further surveys, but certainly I'll be using this for my map making purposes.
Okay. So how did you come about discovering the scans? So you were looking at the Mediterranean area and these just appeared, or were they more embedded in some technical research?
Well, yes, it all came down to a theory that I had years prior. See, I had seen this map that NOAA, National Organization for the Ocean, they had created a map back in 2009 called Global Sea Level Drop, 110 meters. And I had noticed an error that they had made on their maps and corrected them. So I sent off an email to their affiliate, and they got back to me and basically told me that the map error that I discovered was correct, and that they would just delete it off their database. The important thing is that it started me on a path of discovery of what the true elevation of the Mediterranean Sea was. I had this crazy theory that the Mediterranean Sea had got disconnected from the Atlantic Ocean around the last ice age for a period of possibly 80,000 years, where a land bridge had opened up and there was a drop in the Mediterranean sea level as opposed to the global sea level drop that was happening at the same time. And that's where I think that Atlantis had its opportunity, its island of stability, where it had an opportunity in the glacial climate, where it's a little bit cooler and more temperate, that the Mediterranean Ocean, Mediterranean Sea, had a period where they maintained a lower sea level state. And on that lower sea level, it was where Telepylos was sitting.
Okay. I want to mention that you are the article that I referencing is Telepylos Gateway to a Lost World, which is featured in Graham Hancock's article's website. It was submitted and he published it a few months ago. And Telepylos is a city out of the Homer's Odyssey, correct?
Yes.
Talk about that, because that really sets up the details of this whole discovery.
Yeah. Well, in Homer's Odyssey, Book 10, he arrives at Telepylos after escaping from the Lotus Eaters.
That's Odysseus, right?
Odysseus. That's it. Sorry.
Yeah, Odysseus, the hero.
Yes, Odysseus is the hero. He escapes from the land of the Lotus Eaters in book 10, I believe, and
Right.
that's where he travels to Telepylos from that location. And in the story, they arrive at the harbor, and the fleet had traveled ahead of him into a sheltered harbor that was very narrow. He noticed that the ships went in, but he was feeling kind of, I guess, hesitant to follow suit. So he stayed back and moored his ship on a rocky outcropping outside of the harbor, where he sent some men ashore, and they had an encounter with the locals. So from Odysseus's perspective, and as much as the story tells us, is only from the perspective of Odysseus watching his men go ashore and him seeing his ships being destroyed as they leave the harbor. So they don't really get a good view of the city. They only know that there's a sheltered harbor. They hear the sounds of rocks shattering the hulls of their ships and splintering their ships and their men screaming out in terror. And then instead of Odysseus going to his men's rescue, he cuts his mooring line and leaves them behind. And that's all we hear in the Odyssey about the story. Now, there's also a little bit of the story where he actually talks about the encounter of the locals. But it's odd because that part of the story doesn't really make a lot of sense because he describes it as everybody dying. So there's no way he could have known the events that happened in the town. So I think there was a little bit of literary device that Homer used there. He certainly added some of the story that he could not have known. But had the story been a true event, it perfectly matches the description of this site.
Yeah, I want to get into more specifics on Telepylos. Why do you think Homer describes the inhabitants of this location, Telepylos, as giant cannibals? Yeah, it's terrible. I mean,
it's a funny story actually. I think it's a bit of a dark tale, to be honest with you, a little bit of dark humor. I'm not sure what the comedic sense of the ancient Greeks were, but the way I see it happening, okay, as the story goes in more detail, he sends two men ashore with a herald. And they meet a young girl who is gathering water from a local well, and she's a daughter of the leader of the town, and who is called Antiphates. So she leads the men to the town to meet his wife, and they describe his wife as being the size of a mountain crag. Now, you can take that as being a giant woman, or you can take that as being a very large woman. You know what I mean? Like, so The story is that she calls for her husband to kill the men. And it's kind of funny because it's like, okay, if she was a very large woman, they could have cracked jokes at her expense, and which would have made her really angry and would have called for her husband to come and execute the men. I can perfectly see that scenario playing out, but Homer himself, he doesn't really describe giants. He uses the word like. He says they grabbed stones that were as heavy as men can carry, that were like boulders that by the time they hit his ship. So basically he used the similes of giants, but nowhere does he really say giants. If you actually read the text, the finer text of the Odyssey, he describes them skewering the men as if they were fish, like to be consumed. But he doesn't say they skewered the men to be consumed. He was using the literary expression. He was saying they were skewered like they were fish to be consumed. So it's all in how it's interpreted. A lot of these stories they use these
artistic
hyperbole
license
is the word I'm looking for. They use this hyperbole to strengthen their story and their narrative.
Okay. So your feeling, and you write about this, is that it's kind of artistic license in writing that they're cannibals and they're giants, maybe just to spice up the story. But we don't know simply because we have no evidence of Telepylos other than, I guess you could say, a myth, right?
Right. It doesn't show up in any of the other writings, as far as I know. It's always been only referenced in Homer's Odyssey. So you'd think they would have popped up somewhere else, a major city that way. But the city itself is so old a time; it's surprising that we even hearing of it.
Yeah. This is what's so amazing about your discovery, Andre, is the fact that you're using Homer's description of Telepylos, and then what you discovered is the location, which is in Malta, Sicily, and it's in an escarpment area, which is, I guess, kind of a long ridge. But from the imaging, the scans, it's a very sophisticated port town, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. The scale is immense. It can be easily compared to Atlantis in its land area that's enclosed inside of the footprint. And certainly, if that was a metropolis of a large city, you would expect to find a agrarian culture outside of that city, supporting that city that would be 5 times the size at least, to support all that requirements for the population.
Yeah, I mean, you have it 17 kilometers long, which is roughly 10 miles, and about half that much for the width. And how deep is it? And when did you actually make the discovery? Because you had to actually do some processing of the data so you could get through it and clarify it. But give us the very earliest discovery and your, it must have been an aha moment like, oh my God, this is significant.
Yeah, well, I recognized it as significant right away. It almost took me 24 hours before I could lay out that or figure in my mind, resolve that it was actually Telepylos. Because, I mean, if you would have mentioned that name, 99 or 999 people out of 1,000 would not know what you were talking about. And certainly it was only on my radar because of my research into Atlantis. And I was creating these fantasy maps and kind of trying to place all these mythological events and mythological locations into context with Atlantis. And I had placed Telepolis actually on my map about 500 kilometers up the coast of Sicily. And when I had found it where it was, I'm like, wow, that can only be in place. It matched the description. Like,
So let me just go, let's
perfectly.
go through it for a second, Andre. So, I mean, I use Google Maps to see the water depth occasionally, and there's some occasional anomalies and lines and stuff like this. You found a whole city. Now, you
Mhm.
didn't use Google Earth. You use what to actually discover the rudimentary outline of the city?
To find the actual city itself, you would never pick it up on Google Earth database. Google Earth uses like a what's called the GEMCO, the Global Earth Database model, which is good for all intents and purposes, but it doesn't get into really detailed survey because it doesn't need to. In my case, I was trying to refine my maps by using what was called the EMODNet. It's the European, I don't know what the acronym means, but if you look up EMODNet, EMODNET, you will find their database, and they have a web viewer that is similar to Google Earth that you can use in 3D and actually navigate to the same spot. And if I would have had my camera working good, I could have brought that up for you. But yes, so yeah, if you go to that website, you can certainly navigate to that location yourself and see it in high detail. It has a couple different years of data up in there, so you might not get the correct image depending on when you load it in. But it's great to see it in 3D because you're able to actually see the site, navigate it yourself. Independent of me, and that's what's great about science. Anything should be open to the world to be able to
Yeah.
instantly verify.
It's just an amazing discovery, Andre. Now, let me just clarify for our listeners. This is not satellite piercing water. This is underwater site sonar scans
Yeah,
and
multi-beam Sanskrit. Yeah, you got it.
and so they're using like Google Earth, they're overlapping with newer scans of that area, I guess. Okay. So how deep is this Telepolis? How deep is the location?
Well, the majority of the city, I believe, sits at an elevation of about minus 200 meters below sea level.
Meters.
That's pretty deep. Yeah, that's farther than most commercial divers will go. You almost need to be saturation diving at that point. And that's where the city proper sits. Now, the beauty of the city, it is a fortress. So it's my approximation that this whole canal that circled the city was about 50 meters deep. So that you can completely go navigate with ships. And that number though is not what. Sorry, I should have to explain what that number comes from, because certainly if you look at the survey now, you don't see that 50-meter depth in the canal. The 50-meter that I digitally reconstructed the site with that number in mind came from a number of papers that studied the Maltese Sicily escarpment and talked specifically about the sediment buildup in that area just south of Telepylos. And they stated in that paper that the buildup was approximately 50 meters. And with that number in
50 meters
mind,
of sediment
yeah,
deep?
50 meters of sediment built up from the bottom of the erosion channel. It's like the
Oh,
big
okay.
scar that kind of leads out of Telepylos right in the main gate. So it's that 50 meters that I use to excavate and digitally recreate and create the renders for the simulation.
Right. In the article, you make a number of statements that the sophistication of the outer perimeter as well as the buildings is advanced. Give us an idea of what that means. Like there's some form of machinery you reference almost that must have been in play. You don't say machinery. I'm using the term machinery, but
Well, I mean, there has to be a process. I don't discount the possibility that they had some kind of machinery. I mean, machine can mean a lot of things. I mean, simple use of a lever is a
yeah,
machine.
or a sophisticated plow of some kind that dug up
Yes,
dirt or something. But the outer perimeter of this city looks pretty damn clean. It's just almost too much good to be true.
it's almost too good to be true, and that is where I believe that a lot of scientists are going to have issue with, because it seems that it boggles the imagination that a pre-Bronze Age civilization could have excavated a canal that is essentially about half the volume of the Suez Canal about
Yeah.
12,000 years ago. You know, without heavy machinery, without explosives, without because you're going to have to excavate a lot of rock in order to dig down to that elevation. And certainly there comes the question of where did that rock go? I mean, I spent a career around civil engineering. So the actual design of the city is fascinating on so many levels when you consider the amount of earthworks that had to have occurred over had to be thousands of years. I mean, I can imagine they could have done it any quicker without machinery. I mean, in our modern age, we probably could have knocked that off in a couple of years, but certainly without those advantages or some kind of system, it would have been nigh impossible. Certainly, that gives me pause many times to say, am I looking at an anomaly or am I looking at something that's possible?
Yeah.
It all comes down to the measurements. The measurements is what tells me that I'm looking at a man-made object, because the entire site measures 100 by 25 stadia. And that would be astronomically impossible for any anomaly to be scanned and to result in an artificial man-made unit of measurement that, and to be completely 100 by 25. It boggles the mind that would actually could be an anomaly.
Yeah. I think the other thing that supports your claim that this is Telepylos is the fact that in one of the scans, you show a central temple. And also, you claim that there's likely a buildup of architecture that would support a lighthouse.
Yeah,
Let's talk about those features because that central temple is huge.
yeah. Well, when you consider that the whole base had to have been excavated, it makes you wonder how they built up from that elevation. I mean, and certainly from the elevation that they excavated to the top, it's over 150 meters in height, which is higher than the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is what I alluded to. Now, certainly, if you took off that 50 meters and started at the 50 meters, then it'd probably only be 70 meters above that plane. But still, its size and scope outside of that is still very huge. And its placement directly across from the main entrance, again, highlights its importance as the entryway, as the focal point of the city. You know, it's leading out with its most massive feature as you're entering the front door, basically. You know,
Does any of the sites scan sonar get up close to those features offshore?
no, unfortunately not. The level of detail that we're getting on those points only can tell us very basic details, and it doesn't give us any kind of resolution that would pick up anything small at all. Which is why I'm trying to mount an expedition myself. I've been budgeting it for some time now, and I know I can get up there with an ROV in a dinghy if I have to, and actually survey the site. I got a little bit of experience doing it, and I know I can do it. It's on my plans, but it's not in my budget right now.
It's too bad you can't reach out to the National Geographic. This would be a perfect fit for one of their explorations.
There are so many outfits that I would love to have an opportunity to speak with, Cliff. Unfortunately, I don't have the network or the contacts or the interest sparked yet in the world in order to get those connections made. But I'm open for that first call. I'm dreaming of them calling me one day.
Yeah,
Christopher Nolan, I got a story for you.
We'll have to see at the end what happens. This Malta Sicily escarpment. Talk about the layout of the city. I think you give an estimate for the population, which is big, number one, but number two, it's actually in an area that's a natural harbor, isn't it?
What do you mean by natural harbor?
Well, Telepolis, you have a canal that leads into the actual city, but it's low enough that, ships could dock there and then maybe there was a, if you get down closer, there's a walkway or something that's built out. It looks like in one of your renderings that there is part that is supportive of ships docking and commerce being loaded in and out. Talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, logistically speaking, they would have to have ways of getting from the water to the heights of the city. I mean, I recognize that. I mean, even the island of Manhattan has 22 bridges that cross over into the borough. So if you having such a city popping out of the water, you need to have ways of getting to your population, even if it's on the back end, getting supplies and food into your population. And I recognize that the design of the city, it strikes of a Roman-esque design, as in it's laid out in a grid pattern with such regularity that when you break it out, the beauty of it is that it works out to almost like 24 by 24 stadia blocks, or what they call regios, which would allow for a structured layout of a city to be designed. And it works out perfectly with some of the points that you see in the survey popping out. Like the city is laid out in that 24 and the 14, 24, 24, 24, 14 kind of layout. But the width is also 25. So there's the 25 and there's the 24s. But the big thing about the width is that you could imagine it would include a boulevard or a central avenue that would traverse the whole city, and also a boundary road that would probably encompass the whole city as well, which would make up for that extra stadia in width. You know what I mean? It's almost like it allocates road alignments for the city. I'm sorry, I'm talking in civil engineering terms because I can imagine the city being built like no problem. I've dreamt of actually building it out in 3D and bringing it back to life, to be honest with you. One of my future projects.
What's your estimate for the population?
Well, the population, I had original population on that written down, and I kind of re-estimated it because I didn't think my original population density was high enough. I was thinking on the conservative end, it could easily support a population of 80,000 people.
80,000.
And that's on the low end. You're not talking about multi-level unit homes. You're talking about just single level homes for the most part, not these complex multi-level units that you might find in more dense Roman cities. So I think that's reasonable. Certainly, you're looking at it doesn't exist in a vacuum. So there's also the people who live and support that population. So any population you have in the city, you got to consider the population of fishermen who live outside the city, the population of farmers who live outside. So all encompassing the whole area might have been easily 250,000 people spread out over those plains.
Right. What I find fascinating, Andre, is when you take the Tangiers land bridge hypothesis into effect, then you're talking tens of thousands of years ago, prior to the last ice age. What's a conservative number? Because you use 80,000 years ago as the perhaps inception of this area. But what would you say comfortably? Well, it doesn't have to be comfortably. What would you say is kind of a timeline?
Well, I mean, certainly 80,000 years is a long time. And looking at our own history over the last 100 years, it's hard to fathom that human civilization could have existed for tens of thousands of years and not industrialized to the same level we have now. I'm on the conservative end of things, where we were just coming out of being the hunter gatherers, and when these plains opened up, they were in fact the cradle of our civilization. And I would think that conservatively, the city itself could have been there for certainly as long as the Egyptian civilization. We're talking 3,000-4,000 years.
Yeah.
And the build up to that, I mean, people would have been living in the area for tens of thousands of years.
Right. Is it your theory that the land bridge closed off what is now the Mediterranean from the Atlantic?
Yeah, and it could have happened anywhere up to 80,000 years. Now, that number is completely an estimate. I'm only basing it on charts and an estimated timeline and an estimated elevation of what I believe that bridge to be. But I mean, I'm open for further exploration. But I think at a minimum, it could have been 60,000 years, but certainly at that long.
Okay.
Least.
Yeah, I mean, the understanding is that there were multiple phases of the so-called Atlantis continent, which was in the Atlantic. But you're writing a book. We should let our listeners know that you're writing a book on evidence of Atlantis.
Right.
Is this what you would consider a satellite, perhaps a city affiliated with an Atlantis culture? Because, yeah,
Well, it does that not directly. It's on the path backward from it, and I say that because I want the audience to know that the entire purpose of this was my endeavors to find Telepylos was because I discovered Atlantis on the same shoreline as Telepylos. The reason why I'm bringing Telepylos to the public first is because the surveys that are in the area that I believe Atlantis to be are not as detailed as the area around Telepylos. Because of the area that Telepylos is in, it got more surveys because of the geology of the area
oh,
than the area that I'm looking at. So, fortunately, because of that geological work, I was able to see the city. Now, where I propose Atlantis to be, it's not as clear cut. I wouldn't be showing you the bottom of the ocean. You wouldn't be able to pick up the detail. I've looked it up. It's just not. It's just not where. It's not showing where it should be, and that doesn't mean it's not there. I'm convinced of its location. But once I prove that Telepylos was there, then it lends credence to any theory that I'll present after this point. I think that was the best way of me trying to validate
yeah.
Atlantis as being a possibility.
Can you expand a little bit on the side scan sonar imaging work that you have discovered and used to find a location for Atlantis?
Well, again, I'm using the same database that I found Telepylos in, and I'm at the word I'm looking for is it's the data that's there is the data that's there. I don't have access to more surveys than what has been surveyed. Fortunately, that's the nature of the ocean. 95% of it is just not surveyed in high detail
Okay.
unless it needs to be surveyed in high detail. Fortunately, unless there was a pipeline being put in or some kind of subsea service being put in, they're not going to survey the area that I need to see surveyed, fortunately.
Yeah, I
And if
mean,
I
I'm going to definitely have you back to talk about Atlantis, this book when it gets published that you're working on right now. But where was Atlantis? Was it in the Atlantic or
Mediterranean,
it was in the Mediterranean?
absolutely.
Wow.
I will eat my hat, Cliff, if it's not in the Mediterranean.
The Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah, and that is why it's been hidden for so long. Is that we didn't understand. Okay, if I were to ask you what is the number one detail that you took from Plato that would point your way to Atlantis, like what was the number one clue?
The concentric rings.
Okay, and I would say to that is that Atlantis was completely destroyed in its cataclysm, and those concentric rings are washed away.
Okay.
That's one thing. But what I was kind of getting at is that the number one reference that people use to find Atlantis has always been the Pillars of Hercules,
Oh, yeah.
right? And it's my contention that the Pillars of Hercules were not the Strait of Gibraltar, because in my theory, in the time of Atlantis, the Mediterranean was cut off from the Atlantic. It was its own enclosed sea, right? And because it was its own enclosed sea, there was no Atlantic Ocean in that world. There was what was called the word Atlantic actually means the Sea of Atlas, which is the Sea of Atlantis. Unfortunately, the name the Atlantic got its name as a misnomer because it doesn't actually mean, and I'm not the first person to say that Strait of Gibraltar is not the Pillars of Hercules. It goes back thousands of years. Strabo of Amasia originally just described it in his book Geographica, how ancient Greek scholars of the time actually were in disagreement with what the actual Pillars of Hercules was. And certainly the way he described it, in the end, he said that ancient mariners have always referred to the Strait of Gibraltar as the Pillars of Hercules, and that's what they'll always be known as. And he didn't argue anything beyond that point. But that's my point, is that they actually predate the Strait of Gibraltar opening up.
So is it your contention that Atlantis being in the Mediterranean was connected to present day Africa, Italy, Crete, and these other islands? I mean, if you're saying
It's in there somewhere.
so really what you're saying then is that Telepylos is part of Atlantis.
It's part of the maritime network. Whether or not, like I said, whether or not it was his enemy or its trading partner remains to be seen. But I'm of the mind that no giant city like Atlantis, as is described, existed in a vacuum. There had to have been contemporaries of the same size and scale you would think. And certainly when you think about how Plato described Atlantis, he described it, Greece at the time, as being at war with Atlantis. So you'd imagine that a city as sophisticated as that would have a maritime equivalent. And certainly they had a maritime equivalent in the Greeks at the time, which again would have been 10,000 years before the current Greeks, which is kind of odd that Plato gets his history of his own country from the Egyptians. And that's something that's never mentioned. In fact, I've never heard anybody ever mention that, hey, why is Plato getting he says Solon is where he got the information to, but that's just a literary device that any author would use to not put themselves in their own novel. You know, they're not going to insert themselves as a source of information. So they created a statesman that he knew his countrymen would know, and used him as the carrier of that literary device as well.
Yeah.
But again, it's very interesting that Greece isn't spoken of in the same light as Atlantis was, because a lot was lost in ancient Greece that most people are not failed to see as well. Certainly reading over the Timaeus and the Critias, he describes ancient, or I should say even more ancient than ancient Greece, as being far more lush and more populous than the Greece of his days.
I don't want to give away your book because we'll probably have you back on the program when the book's published, but what's the reference to ancient Atlantis that exists now? Would you say it's the pre-dynastic Egyptian buildings, pyramids, and temples, or would you go further towards Central Europe?
I'm of the mind. A lot of people have different theories of what happened to the Atlanteans post-apocalypse, and I would think that they would have had a wide influence on many proto-cultures of the time. I can see them escaping to the Mesoamerica. I can see them getting to Africa, getting to Egypt, and certainly the god Thoth has been alluded to being an Atlantean priest, and it fits the description 100%. Like what he is, the bringer of wisdom, the bringer of knowledge, the bringer of the written word. He sounds like a well-read man who came from a advanced civilization, if anything. And I think that certainly it was this cultural amnesia that we all had at the time that erased this whole chapter from our.
And what is the causation of the demise of Atlantis? Was it a volcanic eruption, or do you follow the Younger Dryas theory, the latest, which is there was an asteroid hit that basically destroyed a lot of landforms, but also may have caused massive tsunamis and other problems, geological problems?
I used to be a very, very, very strong proponent of the Younger Dryas theory myself. I thought it made perfect sense. And even while I was doing my research here, and had even discovered my theory about the land bridge, I was still kind of had that in the back of my mind as a possibility. But to be honest with you, I discovered a completely different mechanism by which Atlantis fell. And fortunately, it's one of those things that would be kind of giving away the story of my book as well, right? Because Atlantis fell, you're going to know exactly where it is, right?
Yeah.
But suffice it to say that it doesn't require any common impactor at all. It doesn't require global, what do they call it, a crustal displacement. It doesn't require a pole shift. It doesn't require any of those fringe theories that are out there. Fortunately, I know a few people would love to have that corroborated at the same time. But the problem is that the Younger Dryas was always looked at as a global event. And when you needed a global flood to explain the fall of Atlantis, you needed that bigger event. The problem is that most people see the world as the planet Earth. And even in ancient terms, the world itself was the world that they knew. And the world that they knew was encapsulated by the Mediterranean basin, for the most part, for lots of these ancient cultures. Now, I'm not talking about the ancient Americans or the Hindus. They're all their own subcultures, their own worlds, right? So in that respect, when you say that the world flooded, the Mediterranean basin was what flooded in that ancient world. It didn't need what was only a natural process. The world was coming out of the interglacial period. There was a lot of extra glaciers that were creating meltwater and That's where the water came from.
Yeah, it's very fitting that you're on Graham Hancock's article website section, simply because Graham's whole theory is that we have amnesia, and there's a complete prehistory that has been ignored by our scientists, and it's been ignored because they are not allowed to expand their consciousness around earlier dates than, say, 3 or 4 thousand years ago.
Yeah, I mean Mesopotamia is just a drop in the bucket. I mean, even Göbekli Tepe challenges that narrative
It
easily.
does, yeah.
But the scale of Göbekli Tepe versus Telepylos is like comparing just a campsite to a city, you know. And I'm not trying to build up my own discovery here, but it's important. It's such an important discovery, and I say that with trying to be as humble as I can, because I wish that somebody better than myself, I guess, would be the spokesman for it. I'm not the best public speaker. I'm not the best content creator at making videos. I'm doing the best as a person who just stumbled across one of the most incredible things he could ever think of.
You did a beautiful job on the rendering of Telepylos. What would you say the amount of refinement that took place? Was it a lot of reworking, or did you just perhaps retool a few things?
For the simulation, for the most part, what I did was I followed a simple rule: is that if anything had a hard shadow, that it was generally a hard line. That is to say that there wasn't sedimentation buildup in certain high points. So they kind of defined lines that I could use to define to differentiate between what would be considered bedrock and silt. And once I kind of delineated those spots using that 50-meter number in mind, I used the software, in this case Unreal Engine 5, to digitally remove approximately that depth in those areas that I saw. And then it became a little bit of sculpting, I guess. I mean, I looked at the terrain, but I had what was there, and I could see, and I know how the data is interpreted. I know what high points are. Sometimes a high point will only give you a little bit of detail, and then it'll drop off to a lower point, creating what like a cone. Right. And sometimes these cones are not shaped like cones because you only got one point at the top and one point at the bottom. But what it could be is a statue, for example, could appear as a cone. Or a
Right.
lighthouse that looks like a cone would be a lot more cylindrical and like a post. So in that respect, I did take some artistic license, but almost like I was removing just as little as I could. I was excavating it digitally, I guess, pretending I was using like a fine, soft hand or a brush to brush away years of accumulation, as an archaeologist would, in a way, I guess. You know what I mean? I use
Yeah.
my intuition to guide my hand.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great, the renderings look great. Those of you listening, we will have all these renderings available on our Facebook page. Go to Facebook, go to Earth Ancients. You'll see a group of scans, and I'll also have them on Instagram and the website. In the description about you, your bio, Andre, you say you aim to spark a renaissance in archaeology. What does that mean? Are you not pleased with archaeology right now, or are you?
I can grind a few axes with the current archaeological establishment. I was naive when I originally approached a number of them, including John Hoops and Mr. Dibble, Mr. Flint Dibble, and
Oh, you approached Flint Dibble with this?
oh yeah, he blocked me instantly. He wouldn't even hear me out. At least John Hoops had the staying power to look at it for a minute and then insult me.
Well, let me stop. I wasn't going to mention this before, but there has been another researcher that has identified the location. Didn't Dibble see his reference?
No, I guess not. The other researcher doesn't have worldwide recognition for the site yet either. So I guess
Not like this is not like this is brand new. This is something that's been looked at and not perhaps in scientific papers released. It hasn't been released to the general public, but this is not a shadow on the bottom
yeah,
of the ocean.
it's absolutely not an anomaly. And if anybody claims that it is, they just don't know what they're talking about. I've actually spoken with experts in the field of bathymetry and gotten their validation and their praise and support for my work as well, saying that, yeah, this is absolutely not a data.
Yeah.
And certainly the other researcher, Dr. Luigi Assai, was the first person to discover this, and that lends credence to the site as well. It shouldn't be a debate of who found it first or who found what first. It's a matter of science and the truth. And I think it's more important that word gets out about this site, not about who was the first person to say they found it. And it's my mission to, like I said, spark that renaissance in archaeology, because I believe that mainstream archaeologists became a club of gatekeepers. They don't see anybody on the outside as having any valid input or opinions, and
Yeah, it's too
will
bad.
gladly mock and hurl insults at you from their ramparts.
Yeah, we need more engineers like you, Andre. Listen, this has been a real eye opener. I really appreciate you coming on the program and also releasing these scans for viewing to the general public. I really appreciate that. As much as I appreciate Graham Hancock, his viewership is limited, whereas if we get it on Facebook, I think we can get a larger audience to begin researching this. When do you believe, and this is just an estimate on your side, when do you think your book might be released?
My full book on Atlantis and the whole shebang, I'd say I'll have that done within about a month or two, depending on support and interest. I mean, if I get a lot more followers on my Twitter account and people are screaming at me to get this done, it will give me the energy I need to push it out quicker.
Yeah, and also I mentioned before we started that if you have a completed book, I can look for a publisher. That would not be a few months. They would want to edit it and help you with the graphics and the photos and so forth. And so that might be another year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in that published final product, of course, it would take longer. I'm just saying for my end, for me to be able to hand it off to an editor and for them to proofread it, I'd probably need that much time at least.
Yeah. Amazing. Now, you don't have a website, and do you have a social media placement of any kind?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter my handle is the Immortician.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
And his last name is Chaisson, Chaisson, Andre Chaisson. And so you have the basic social media that people can contact you. All right. Hey, this has been really great. The article, for those of you that want to read it, is available also on Earth Ancients. Go to Earth Ancients and you'll see the photo. Facebook, Earth Ancients, look for the international or group page, and I will list this and along with the images. Andre, continued success on this, man. You really, I hope you didn't open a Pandora's box. I don't think you did. I think you've done such a great job with the rendering. It's pretty obvious that you have something.
Oh man, and thank you for having me here to be able to bring this to light. It's my dream.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Hey, we'll definitely have you back. Okay, man.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, I'll look forward to our next chat.